All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on something a little different, using Squid Game to help you learn English.
Interesting.
Now I know what you're thinking.
Right.
Deadly games and learning a language. It seems a little crazy,
Yeah.
but the stuff I've been reading makes a pretty good argument.
Yeah, it's definitely not the usual way to do it, but that's what makes it so interesting. Squid Game gives you this really unique chance to learn a language because of all the different characters.
Right.
They all have their own way of talking, and the show uses a lot of idioms that people use in English every day.
So it's more than just memorizing word lists. It's
Yeah.
about seeing how people actually use language,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
But wouldn't the subtitles be distracting
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to learn? How would you
Uh,
really focus on the words themselves?
That's where the learning techniques come in. The articles I was reading suggest this method called shadowing. You basically try to copy how the actors are speaking, like their intonation and pronunciation,
Yeah.
almost like you're doing voice acting for the show.
That sounds kind of fun.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a fun way to practice pronunciation, I bet.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be tough to keep up with how fast they talk? Especially with all the slang and idioms.
You're right. It can be a challenge. But that's what's so cool about Squid Game. It's so engaging, you'll want to stick with it.
Right.
And the articles I was reading suggest starting with just small scenes and then working your way up to the longer parts.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the characters. The research says that each character's lines are like a mini vocab lesson.
Oh, wow.
Like Gihun, the main character.
Oh.
He uses words like deadbeat, gamble, and desperate. It's a bit depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, it does reflect his tough situation, but it's not just about single words. It's how his language shows how desperate he is and what drives him to do the things he does in the games.
So his vocabulary is like a clue to his personality, not just random words.
Exactly.
What about the other players? How is what they say different from Gihun?
Well, let's take Sang-woo. He's a former businessman, so he uses more formal words like embezzlement, leverage, and ruthless.
Interesting.
Shows he's smart, but also hints that he's kind of calculating and maybe even dangerous.
Yeah, just one word like ruthless
Mm-hmm.
can totally foreshadow what a character might do.
Right.
It's crazy how different his language is from Gihun, who's like always begging and pleading.
Yeah.
But what about Sebayak, the North Korean defector? She's got such a different story.
Hmm?
How does how she talks reflect her experiences?
Good question. Sebayak uses words like defector, smuggle, and resilient, words that show her strength and how resourceful she is.
Yeah.
But they also hint at the difficult things she's been through, the trauma.
So if we pay attention to those little differences in the words they use, we can understand the characters much better, like what motivates them and how complex they are. It's like Squid Game is giving us a lesson in character development just through language.
Exactly. And it's not just about the individual words, it's about how they use language to talk to each other, how they manipulate things, and ultimately how they survive.
That's really insightful. I feel like we've only just started to see how much we can learn about language from Squid Game. But before we get into the deeper stuff like themes and idioms, I'm curious what you think about the subtitles. Do they help you learn or do they get in the way?
That's a good point. The article suggests that subtitles can be really helpful, especially for beginners,
Okay.
because they can see the words as they're being spoken. But the important thing is not to just passively read the subtitles. You have to actually listen to what's being said.
So you have to find the right balance between reading and listening, maybe trying to guess what a character is going to say before you read the subtitle.
Exactly. And as you get better, you can try turning off the subtitles for short bits and see how well you understand just by listening.
It sounds like learning this way takes time.
Yeah.
What about people who've already seen Squid Game? Is there anything new they can learn by watching it again with language learning in mind?
Even if you've seen it before, you can still discover new things. When you watch it specifically for the language, you start to notice the little details in the dialogue, the
Yep.
wordplay, and how they use language to build suspense, make it funny, or convey strong emotions.
Wow, it's amazing how watching something with a different goal in mind can change your whole perspective.
Yeah.
It's like I'm seeing Squid Game for the first time again, but now I'm paying attention to the words instead of just the action.
Yeah, that's the power of language. It's the
Mhm.
basis of how we tell stories, how we develop characters, and how we explore different themes. And in Squid Game, the language is just as captivating as what you see on screen.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Speaking of captivating, let's move on to those idioms. The research mentioned that Squid Game is full of them.
Oh, yeah.
And I know idioms can be hard, but they're also really important for sounding like a native speaker and understanding all the cultural stuff.
You're absolutely right. And Squid Game is a great way to learn idioms in the context of the show, which makes them easier to remember and use in real life.
So tell us about them. What are some of the Squid Game idioms we should be using?
One that stands out is to be a ganbu. Now, it's often translated as friend, but it actually means something much deeper. It's a relationship built on trust and loyalty, a bond that's really tested in the games.
So it's not enough to know what the words mean literally. You have to understand what they mean in the culture.
Right.
What other interesting ones did you find?
Another one is to be out of the woods. Usually it means you're safe from danger.
Right.
But in Squid Game, it's kind of ironic because the characters are never really safe. They're always facing some new threat.
It really shows how tense and uncertain their situation is. It's almost like the idiom itself is playing a trick on us.
Exactly. And then there's to have a target on one's back, which is a perfect way to describe how vulnerable the characters are and how alliances can change so quickly.
It makes me think about how language can reflect who has power, both in the games and in real life.
That's a great point. And it leads us to the next level of analyzing language in Squid Game, how it comments on the society.
Right. The show is known for how it criticizes social inequality and the bad sides of capitalism. How does the language do that?
Well, notice how the players talk compared to the VIPs. The players who are usually struggling with debt and stuff use more everyday language, even slang.
Yeah.
But the VIPs speak formally, almost like they're not really involved. It shows just how big the gap is between their worlds.
It's like their language makes the power imbalance even stronger. It's subtle, but really effective.
And then there are words like competition, debt, and investment that are used all the time.
Okay.
It emphasizes the idea that you have to step on others to get ahead, which is basically what the capitalist system is about.
It's interesting how those normal, everyday words sound so sinister when you hear them in the show.
Right.
Competition becomes a life or death thing, and debt becomes a way to control people.
The show isn't afraid to use language to show the problems with the system and to make viewers question what they believe in.
It's really powerful. But Squid Game also looks at what it means to be human, like how we make choices about right and wrong and how we try to survive. How is language used to show those internal struggles?
The characters talk about things like choosing the lesser of two evils, having a change of heart, and hitting rock bottom. These phrases show the really tough decisions they have to make and the choices they make when they're under pressure.
It makes you think about how you would react in those situations, what choices you would make.
Right.
I think that's part of what makes the show so great. It forces us to face these uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
And language is how we face those truths. It makes us think about why the characters do what they do. It makes us analyze their motives. And ultimately, it makes us think about our own values and beliefs.
So we've got vocabulary idioms, social commentary, and philosophical questions all packed into the language of Squid Game. It's amazing how much there is to discover.
And we're not even finished yet. We haven't talked about how you can actually use Squid Game to learn English.
Right. We talked about shadowing and transcribing. Are there any other techniques that would be especially helpful?
One that I find really works is taking those idioms we talked about and making your own sentences or even short stories inspired by Squid Game.
Oh, wow.
It's a fun way to practice using them in different situations and really learn what they mean.
That's a great idea. It's like turning language learning into creative writing. But what about resources? Are there any online tools or materials that could help people dive deeper into the language of Squid Game?
Absolutely. If you do a quick search, you'll find tons of quizzes, flashcards, and even interactive games specifically made for learning English through Squid Game.
It's incredible how this show has inspired so many cool learning tools. It just goes to show how much of an impact it's had around the world and how it can connect with people from all different backgrounds.
And that's what makes it such a powerful tool for language learning. It's not just about memorizing words and grammar rules. It's about getting involved in a story, connecting with the characters, and exploring different cultures through language.
So as we start wrapping up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What do we want them to remember as they go on their own Squid Game language learning adventure?
Don't be afraid to try something different. Don't limit yourself to textbooks and the usual ways of learning. Find creative ways to learn a language and make it part of your daily life.
That's good advice. So to everyone listening out there, go watch Squid Game, grab a notebook, and get ready to see this show in a whole new way. You might be surprised by how much you learn not just about English, but also about yourself and the world we live in.
Exactly. Happy learning.
And that's a wrap on our Squid Game language deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains working and keep practicing your language skills.
See you next time.
All right, we've covered a lot today talking about how Squid Game can be a really effective way to learn English. from breaking down the character's vocabulary and mastering idioms to understanding the social commentary hidden in the dialogue. It's been quite a journey.
And the amazing thing is that we've only just scratched the surface. There are so many other ways you can use Squid Game to improve your English. It's all about finding what works best for you and how you like to learn.
You're right. Earlier we talked about shadowing as a way to improve pronunciation.
Mm.
But for someone who's never tried before, could you explain it a bit more?
Sure. Shadowing means listening to a scene and trying to copy exactly how the actors are speaking, paying attention to their intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation. It's like becoming a language chameleon, blending in with the characters' voices.
It sounds like a fun and interactive way to practice.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be easier to just pause and repeat? What's the benefit of shadowing?
When you shadow, you have to keep up with the natural speed of the conversation. It helps you develop a feel for the rhythm and flow of English, which is important if you want to sound natural and fluent.
So it's about training your ears and your mouth to work together.
Hmm.
But how do you actually use it with Squid Game? Should you shadow every character, or are there certain scenes that are better for this?
Start with scenes that have characters with clear and distinct accents. For example, Gihun's Seoul dialect is a great way to practice the standard Korean pronunciation that you'll hear in a lot of language learning materials.
That's a really useful tip.
Hmm?
What about those tricky idioms we talked about earlier? How can we make sure we remember them and actually start using them?
One fun and effective way is to create your own Squid Game sentences or even short stories using those idioms. For example, you could write a scene where a character thinks they're out of the woods, but then they find out they have a target on their back.
That's like taking those idioms for a test drive and seeing how they work in different situations. Speaking of testing, are there any online resources that can help us track our progress and really understand the vocabulary and idioms from Squid Game?
Absolutely. You can find all sorts of quizzes, flashcards, and even interactive games online. Some language learning apps even have special Squid Game sections that explain the vocabulary and grammar used in the show.
It's amazing how this show has inspired so many creative learning resources. It really shows how popular it is around the world and how it connects with people from all different backgrounds.
And that's what makes it such a powerful tool for learning languages. It's not just about memorizing words and grammar rules. It's about getting involved in a story, connecting with the characters, and experiencing different cultures through language.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember? What do we want them to take away from this as they go on their own Squid Game language learning adventure?
Be open to new and different ways of learning. Don't limit yourself to textbooks and traditional methods. Explore the world around you and find fun and interesting ways to make learning languages a part of your everyday life.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, fire up Squid Game, grab a notebook, and get ready to experience this show in a whole new way. You might be surprised by how much you learn not only about English, but also about yourself and the world we live in.
Happy learning.
And that's a wrap on our Squid Game language deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time, keep those brains active and keep those language skills sharp.
Yeah, it really shows how much tension there is and how they can never really relax. Like the idiom itself is playing a game with us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have to have a target on one's back. It's a great way to show how nobody is safe and how people are constantly making and breaking alliances.
Yeah, it makes you think about how the words people use can show who has power, not just in the games, but in the real world too.
That's a great observation.
Mm.
And it leads us to the next level of language in Squid Game, the social commentary. It's like they're using words to make a statement about society.
Right. The shows are known for criticizing social inequality and how bad capitalism can be.
Yeah.
How does the language do that?
You can see it in the way the players talk compared to the VIPs. The players are usually struggling with debt and stuff, so they use more casual language, even slang.
Yeah.
But the VIPs use really formal language, almost like they're above it all. It shows the huge difference between their worlds. It's like the way they speak reinforces that power imbalance. It's subtle, but really effective.
And then there are words like competition, debt, and investment. They use those words all the time.
Okay.
It emphasizes that idea that you have to be ruthless and step on others to get ahead, which is kind of what the capitalist system is all about.
It's funny how those everyday words can sound so creepy in the context of the show.
Right.
Competition becomes this life or death thing, and debt becomes a way to control and manipulate people.
Exactly. The show uses language to point out the flaws in the system. It makes you question your values and the things you believe in.
It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But Squid Game also explores what it means to be human, like right and wrong and survival. How does language show those internal struggles?
You see characters wrestling with ideas like choosing the lesser of two evils, having a change of heart, and hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
These phrases give you a glimpse into the really difficult choices they have to make when they're under so much pressure.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how you would react in those situations, what you would choose to do.
Right.
I think that's part of what makes the show so brilliant. It makes you confront these uncomfortable truths about yourself and humanity.
And language is the key to that confrontation. It forces us to think about those ideas, to analyze the character's motivations, and ultimately to look at our own values and beliefs.
So we've got vocabulary idioms, social commentary, and even philosophical questions, all packed into the language of Squid Game. It's incredible how much depth there is to unpack.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the practical part yet, using Squid Game to actually learn English.
You're right. We talked about shadowing and transcribing. Are there any other techniques that would be really helpful?
One technique that I find really effective is taking those idioms we talked about and creating your own sentences or even short stories based on Squid Game.
It was interesting.
It's a fun way to practice using them in different contexts and really understanding what they mean.
That's a fantastic idea. It's like turning language learning into creative writing.
Ah,
But what about resources? Are there any online tools or materials that could help people delve deeper into the language of Squid Game?
absolutely. There are tons of resources available online. A quick search will turn up quizzes, flashcards, and even interactive games specifically designed for learning English with Squid Game.
Wow, it's amazing how this show has inspired so many cool learning resources. It really shows how much of a global phenomenon it is and how it connects with people from all walks of life.
And that's what makes it such a valuable tool for language learning. It's not just about memorizing words and grammar. It's about immersing yourself in a story, connecting with characters, and exploring different cultures through the power of language.
So as we wrap up this section of our deep dive, what's the key message for our listeners? What do we want them to take away as they embark on their own Squid Game language learning journey?
Be open to exploring new and different ways to learn. Don't limit yourself to the traditional methods like textbooks. Find fun and engaging ways to make language learning a natural part of your life.
That's great advice. So to all of our listeners out there, go watch Squid Game. Again, grab a notebook and get ready to experience the show in a whole new way. You might be surprised by how much you learn not only about the English language, but also about yourself and the world we live in.
Happy learning!
Yeah, it's a great way to see how those idioms work in the real world. Speaking of testing, are there any online resources that can help people track their progress and really get a good grasp of the vocabulary and idioms from Squid Game?
Absolutely. Tons. There are quizzes, flashcards, you can even find interactive games online.
Wow.
And some language learning apps even have whole sections dedicated to Squid Game. They break down the vocab and grammar used in the show.
It's really amazing how this show has sparked so many creative learning tools. It's a testament to how it's resonated with audiences worldwide and its ability to connect with people from different walks of life.
Yeah, and that's what makes it such a powerful tool for language learning. It goes beyond just memorizing words and grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's about immersing yourself in a story, connecting with the characters, and exploring other cultures through the lens of language.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main message we want our listeners to walk away with? What do we want them to remember as they embark on their own Squid Game language learning adventure?
I'd say embrace the unconventional. Don't feel limited to textbooks and traditional learning methods. There's a whole world out there.
Right.
Find creative ways to incorporate language learning into your everyday life.
Well said. To all our listeners out there, fire up Squid Game. Grab a notebook and get ready to discover a whole new layer to this captivating show.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by how much you learn, not just about the English language, but about yourself and the world we live in.
It's happy learning.
And that wraps up our deep dive into Squid Game and language learning. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those language skills sharp.